Coming of World War II. And to remind you what we did last time, we talked about two major breakthroughs in international affairs in 1938. One was the Anschluss of Austria, which means linking up or absorption of Austria into the Großdeutschland, or the Great Germany, in 1938, which was done peacefully. The Germans were welcomed in the streets of Vienna. There's documentary footage showing the celebrations of Austria joining Germany. And the next big breakthrough and success of Hitler was the Munich Agreement. And again, to remind you, it was an agreement of the great powers, the concert of Europe, Great Britain, Italy, Germany, France, decided the fate of Czechoslovakia. The German minority, Sudeten Deutschland, it was called, of South Germans, Sudeten means Southern German, were allowed to self-determine themselves, which means to join Germany as a German-speaking minority in Czechoslovakia. Now, the Czechs were not invited, so this was kind of like insulting. It was decided behind their backs, and strictly speaking, there's nothing particularly wrong with this, but it was not very polite not to invite the country affected, at least to negotiate. And secondly, it basically was perceived by the rest of Europe that the Western powers are trying to cut a deal with Hitler. And as your textbook shows, that had an effect on Stalin, and he basically began to think, well, they're ready to cut a deal with Hitler, why can't I have a deal with Hitler too? So in a sense, it's very much connected to what's going to happen later on in 1939. Now, finally, we come to the stormy events of 1939 that's going to lead to World War II. Now, the first thing that happens is that the Germans did not stop with the Sudetenland. And I believe it was March 1939 that the German troops enter Prague. They basically take over all of the Czech lands, and Slovakia is declared independence. So basically you have the Czech Republic totally absorbed into Germany. And the German argument, it used to be Bohemia, part of Austria. Now that Austria is part of the Reich, why not Bohemia as well? So that's their argument. Obviously, that doesn't sit well with the Czechs, who believe that their nation was taken over without its consent, using the German minority as a springboard to take over all of Bohemia, or today Czech Republic. Now that actually angers the British and the French, and they provide a guarantee to Poland and to Romania. Now, the problem with this guarantee is that it basically means that if there's any war or any military confrontation between Germany and Poland, the Western powers are going to defend Poland. However, it does not define what Poland is, and I think they should have been more clear about it. Because does that mean that any Polish borders are guaranteed? For example, if Lithuania tried to get back Vilnius, which was occupied by the Polish troops, would that also be violation of territorial integrity of Poland? The problem was that Poland was not what Poland is today. Polish borders in 1939 included big territories that did not have any Polish population. So let me explain, as I did in the morning. Poland of 1939 had, first of all, the Danzig corridor, which means it had the German-speaking area in the north, connecting it to the Baltic Sea, that cut off East Prussia from the rest of Germany. It also had Vilnius, which is today the capital of Lithuania, and of course it was not Polish territory, it was Lithuania. A part of Lithuania was taken over in 1920 in the war with the communist Russia. On top of it, it had a big chunk of Belarus, which was also a treaty of 1920, and in the south it had Lvov, today called Lviv, And in 1914, it was called Lemberg. It was a part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. In other words, Poland, between the two world wars, had a piece of Lithuania, a piece of Belarus, a piece of Ukraine, and a piece of Germany. So it had four national minorities that did not particularly like to be in Poland. Nevertheless, that was the Polish state. The question was, did the Western powers guarantee Poland in the borders of 1939? Or what kind of Poland in which kind of borders? That question remained unclear. Now, with Romania, there was a similar problem, which was that Transylvania, about a half of today's Romania, used to be, before World War I, a part of Hungary. And even to the present day, about 3 million Hungarians who live in Transylvania and who at that time felt very uncomfortable being given to Romania, because Romania was on the correct side of history with the Allies and Hungary was punished because it was part of Austria-Hungary. In other words, the problem is that when you resolve one problem and make peace, as it was Versailles Treaty, they created a whole bunch of new problems. A problem of Hungarian minority in Romania, a problem of Lithuanian minority in Poland, Belarusian minority in Poland, Ukrainian minority in Poland, and of course the Danzig corridor. So, now, the diplomacy of 1939 is very active and very dangerous, as you could put it this way. What Hitler is trying to do is to continue his successes peacefully, and if need be, he is ready to go to war to revise the Versailles Peace Treaty. However, his generals would not let him fight on two fronts. Germany had learned its lesson, and the Germans are of all classes, basically, including the army and the political leadership and Hitler, they realized they should not fight a war against France and Russia at the same time. So it's got to be one at a time, and that's the only way to win if there is a war. Now, Hitler is not scared by the British and French guarantee to Poland. He doesn't take it seriously, and as it will show itself, he was right. There's not going to be any particularly serious action on their behalf. So Hitler is now thinking that he should cut a deal with Stalin. And that brings us to the summer of 1939 and the negotiations that are going on. Now, I'll give you all kinds of various perspectives on the matter. But the fact is that in the summer of 39, there were negotiations going on between the Soviet Union and Britain and France. And the Soviet Union, which means Stalin, proposed to create collective security, sort of that guaranteeing the peace as it is now in the borders that it is today. The British and the French did not want to go ahead with it. Now, why? For what reason? Nobody else. They didn't trust Stalin. They said, fine, they didn't trust Stalin. But, what is the alternative other than going to war? So they pretty much refused this. That really meant that Stalin was free to act on its own. And on the 22nd of August 1939, Ribbentrop, the foreign minister of Nazi Germany, comes to Moscow with an offer to Stalin. Now, there's books written about these negotiations. They're called Hitler-Stalin Pact or Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact or Soviet-Nazi Pact, whatever you want to call it. But the point is there was an agreement that was reached between Ribbentrop and Molotov, Russian foreign minister, Soviet foreign minister. Now, from secret archives, we already know now that Hitler offered to Stalin, that instructions to Ribbentrop were just give him almost anything. In other words, much more than what actually Ribbentrop managed to get away with. Hitler was ready to give huge concessions to Stalin in order to have free hand in the West, in case the British and the French actually meant it and went to serious war on behalf of Poland. So basically Ribbentrop asked Stalin, what do you want? and Stalin basically had a la carte offer what he wanted. Well, the first thing that he wanted was a part of Belarus and Ukraine back to the Soviet Union. Moreover, Belarus was a part of the Russian Empire before World War I. This part of Ukraine, Lemberg, that was not. It never belonged to Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. For centuries, it was a part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. But the people who live there are Ukrainian. I mean, that's beyond any reasonable doubt. This is a historic part of Ukraine behind the Carpathian Mountains, and they were for many years Austria-Hungary. So Stalin says, we want that. Also, a secret protocol in that pact said that the Baltic countries would be, quote, in the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union. Not necessarily taken over, but in the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union. And Stalin also implied that Finland would be in the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union. Now, it may sound, and the Western historians say this is aggression, this is a pact. Don't forget, my dear boys and girls, that in 1918, the Western powers pretty much divided the Middle East between themselves, and nobody said that this is aggression and this is unfair. I mean, they pretty much taken over the entire Middle East, just between the two of them. Iraq and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Persia and Palestine went to Britain, and then Syria and Lebanon went to France. So basically what Stalin used the opportunity to take over what used to belong to the Russian Empire. I mean, that's the point. All of these territories before 1914 used to be part of a Russian Empire. So he basically thought, well, why don't we just take over what was originally ours? Now, that is, of course, not fair by the international treaties and everything, by Versailles Treaty, but nobody asked, and Russia was not a signatory to Versailles Treaty. It was expelled from the concert of Europe. It didn't have even diplomatic relations until 1930s with these countries. But so Stalin felt perfectly free to do whatever was best from his point of view. In other words, the deal is cut on the 23rd of August, and on the 1st of September, the German troops cross the border and attack Poland. Now, it is also not known, and I've read a lot about it, is that the Poles were so scared of the impending attack on them that they offered to Hitler territorial concessions. Now, what exactly these territorial concessions are, I don't know. I don't think the Germans actually explored this possibility. In other words, it could well be that Hitler could have taken the Danzig corridor without the war. But he didn't. He actually thought, we're going to take all of Poland, and the West is not going to do anything about it. And if they do, we're going to win on one front line war, because the Russians are going to be bought off. So this was his calculation, and in a way, it worked spectacularly well.